All right, back to the issues of the Workers' Day. In most nations, especially produced wealth economies, there is a positive correlation between labor productivity and real economic growth. However, in natural wealth economies, especially resource-rich countries, including oil-rich countries, it is possible to have positive GDP and negative labor productivity. And so, while we celebrate workers, it's important to look at issues of labor productivity as a driver of economic growth. And to have this conversation with us is the Executive Director, Africa Youth Growth Foundation, Dr. Arome Salifu. Thank you very much, Dr. Salifu, for joining us on the program. Good morning and happy Workers' Day to you.
Yeah, good morning. Happy Workers' Day.
So as we celebrate Nigerian workers, including you and I today, it's important to understand the nexus between these two economic variables, productivity and growth. Now, when you look at empirical data published by the MBS and the EIU, you'll find out that the average GDP growth in the last 5 years since 2016 is about 0.30%. In the same period, labor productivity growth was minus 1.28%. This means that Nigeria has been able to eke out an average growth in GDP in 5 years in which it suffered 2 recessions, whilst its labor productivity growth was minus 1.28%. Now, this means that the economy and productivity are moving in opposite directions. Can you explain the reason for this aberrational movement, or can it be said to be a validation of the mineral resource curse theory that oil wealth makes countries and their citizens lazy and unproductive?
Yeah, thank you so much. First and foremost, happy Workers' Day, Nigerians. Of course, today is equally the International Press Freedom Day.
Absolutely.
Of course, your question is quite strategic at this point in time. Nigeria is being faced with a lot of challenges, including the challenge of economic stagnation and, of course, poor productivity on the part of its workforce. But first and foremost, we have to realize the fact that everything, rises and falls on the basis of the governance architecture that is in place. The economy, the productivity of the workforce is oftentimes predicated on the quality of leadership, being provided at that point in time. What is happening today is not just beginning just now. It's something that has been building up over the last couple of years, and we are just beginning to see some of the highlights of the consequences of the leadership failure in the past couple of years. Looking introspectively, you realize that the economy of Nigeria has been dominated by oil, and that, of course, has made almost every other sector to suffer unduly in terms of negligence and neglect on the part of our policymakers, our leadership, and all of that. In other places, in other climes, the fact that the country is blessed, with oil, don't necessarily result to negative productivity or, in any case, bad, economic situations. You have countries like Dubai, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, that are making very good use of their oil resource, and of course they have been able to transform their countries to what what they are today. The story is not the same for Nigeria, purely because of leadership and the quality of leadership. We must realize that for us as a country, we must visit our leadership recruitment process, that we must take our time to select and elect people that have the character, the competence, and the capacity to lead, to envision and to see into the future and plan accordingly for the future. Our failure to plan many years back has brought us to where we are today. If you look at the current global trajectory, the global trend, no country is an island. We all have to depend on one another. because of the fact that Nigeria failed to plan in the last 3 decades or so. You now see Nigerians living, this country in their numbers, looking for other environments where they could have fulfilled, life and destiny. And that is emptying the country. Our best brains are leaving, and that relatively contributes to a certain level of poor productivity. And again, some of the contributory factors, including the fact that we have poor infrastructure to support our productivity. We have situation that almost absolute poor power supply, for our industries to function and for our small scale, manufacturers to be able to manufacture. So that, again, is a major factor to look at if we must consider productivity as a major contributory factor to our economic growth. So the growth we've had over the years have been contributed majorly by oil sector. And the agricultural sector that have been supportive of the oil and gas sector have suffered untold negligence, or more or less difficulty because of challenge of insecurity. Farmers have not been able to go to their farms, and it's even leading to food insecurity. Apart from the fiscal insecurity we have, is leading to food insecurity already, and of course gradually is going to lead to social insecurity and all manner of insecurities that you can imagine in the country. So we need to put our acts together. It's not too late as a country that we must get it right. We must think ahead. We must envision the future and strategically position the country to succeed and to be competitive amongst a global community of nations. We cannot afford to be reactive all through. We cannot. We've got to plan, sit down, get our best hands, get our best brains to plan for this country. We have all it takes to make it. We have all it takes to succeed. We have all it takes to move Nigerians out of poverty. If you look at the key indicators we have right now, we have highest level of unemployed population, not just in Africa, almost in the world right now. We equally have the world poverty capital, and we equally have the third poorest governed country, in the world, based on the latest governance index release. And so all of these are pointing to the negative. And that, again, is a clear warning to us that, indeed, it's no longer business as usual. We've got to go back to the basics, including even our governance system, our leadership recruitment process, to guarantee that, indeed, Nigerians have a future that is guaranteed, a future that is certain, a future they can look up to, and that they can raise their children in without fear, without discrimination, without harassment. So these are some of the realities that I feel, if we don't address, we'll certainly have very difficult,
Mr. Salifu. Mr. Salifu,
yes,
so you talked about the unemployment figures, which is currently at 33.3%. But do you think the unemployment level in Nigeria is also responsible for the low level of productivity?
Yes, of course, if you don't have somebody doing something, you cannot certainly talk about productivity. Once you're idle, you cannot talk of productivity, and you've seen the youth unemployment statistics is 42.5%. That is alarming. If you look at the millions that we are talking of, that is more or less more than population of some countries, and you are having such number unemployed. I mean, how can you relate that, to issue of productivity? Because, I mean, once you are not employed, definitely you are unproductive. You are not contributing anything to the economy. You are not contributing anything to the system. In fact, the reverse is actually the case. That is, you are actually escalating the challenges that already exist in the system. That is talking about the insecurity we have, and that's why Boko Haram, for example, bandits have that free access to our young people to recruit them at will and to convert them for whatever purpose they want them to to serve. And that is the challenge we have, that even the current war we are fighting against insurgents and against bandits, until you're able to address the challenge of unemployment, youth poverty, youth underemployment, you have not addressed the real challenge of insecurity in Nigeria. And these are some of the facts and realities that we have to contend with. You cannot, in any case, talk about productivity without creating employment for the mass youth population that are currently unemployed. And to come to think of it, this build-up didn't start just yesterday, like I said earlier. Over the years, we've neglected the critical component of our development. You talk about education. You talk about health system. You talk about power and infrastructure. You talk about agriculture. You talk about even issues of our election and electoral reform. These are fundamentals that we must visit if we must get this right. And again, our population growth is even at staggering rate as we speak. So these issues are compounded and so complex that you cannot just even look at how best to address it from one angle. You've got to put so many thoughts together, so many perspectives together to be able to sustainably address these issues. We've got to look at the issue of our population growth. Some persons will feel population growth is not a challenge. Population growth is not a challenge when you have proportionate educational, development, prioritization, to make sure that your population is developed well enough to sustain, your production, to sustain your manufacturing, to sustain your service sector, to sustain every other productive activities you engage in as a country. Until we have such population that is of high quality to compete, in the labor force, in the labor market with the rest of the world, we have not started. Why am I saying this? Because we now live in a global community. We have a lot of Nigerians living, and we equally have a lot of Nigerians who could come in. If you want to build a bridge today, you will not say that because somebody is a Nigerian, you have to give it to that person. Of course, we have local content laws and all of that. But in reality, you've got to look at the capacity of that person to deliver that job. So we have to build our local capacity through education to support our production, to support our manufacturing. And that is the reason why a lot of stuff are being imported into the country.
All right.
You look at the fact that almost everything we consume in our households are imported. That is not sustainable. A population, a country that has over 200 million.
Yeah, Dr. Salifu, we really don't have
as a population, and yet you don't have.
Well, Dr. Salifu, we really don't have much time. Yes, I agree with you. We do have the population that should be sort of advantage for us, but perhaps we're not making proper use of it. Anyway, before we let you go, now as we celebrate workers in the midst of a pandemic, and as we deal with all of these crises, and of course the crisis of pandemic and the crisis of insecurity, and then look to the future, there is need for a recovery that is sustainable and inclusive of all, and that means making deliberate and coherent policy choices. So what policies are needed to improve workers' welfare, both in the public and private sector, in order to ensure a productive economy? A quick one, please.
Okay, thank you. First and foremost, I would like to start with the public sector. The minimum wage as passed by National Assembly and signed by Mr. President must be domesticated, localized by all the states. Because you have a system, we have the federal system and we have the states system in terms of salaries and all of that. We've got to ensure that the states are able to pay salaries as contained in the Minimum Wage Act. The second is that workers, the capacity of workers should be built appropriately to be able to meet up with the current realities and current, workforce workplace, challenges. We have many states and many federal agencies that even in the last 5 years, they have not trained their staff. They have not taken them on any form of training. That is not sufficient. That is not good enough. we should be able to train and build a capacity of our workers to be able to meet up with the expectations of their mandate. Then thirdly, that you should be able to take their welfare seriously. If somebody retires today, his packages, his entitlements should be paid as at when due. And you equally have the issue of even retirement plan, that, some cases where you have pensioners queuing, all the way before they have access to, to their funds. That shouldn't be the case. We should have a better functional system. These are the ways you can guarantee better productivity for workers. On the side of the private sector are even doing better in so many cases because it's a very competitive sector. It's a free system where labor mobility is very high. And so the private sector, for me, is something that they're already working on how best to enhance, their labor force, welfare system, and all of that. And we equally have to look at the fact that they are merely complementary to whatever the government is doing, and they ride on what the government is already doing. So government needs to take the lead by making sure they provide the necessary enabling environment to guarantee productivity of workers in Nigeria.
All right, Mr. Ajore, there's a prevalence of insecurity and insurgency across most regions of the country. What can be done to achieve a broad solution to this almost intractable problem?
Yes, this is my advice. Just last 3 weeks, I was in Jibia border in Katsina State. And we went on inspection with some of the officers, to inspect Jibia border on one of the projects we currently implement with the IOM. And we discovered that currently some of these borders are having serious challenge of high level of insecurity in these borders. People are actually exploiting the window of total ban on movement of goods on our borders to now create new pathways to irregularly move goods, commodities in between the countries. A case at hand, practically speaking, was the fact that between Nigeria and Niger Republic, Jibia border, a lot of vehicles are moving using the irregular crossing routes without any, resistance whatsoever. Now, when you have that kind of situation, regardless of what you do within, you cannot fight the issue of insecurity sustainably because movement of arms are happening on regular basis in and out of the country. So there's need to think of building walls around Nigeria. Now, this may look laughable, but this would help provide jobs.
I'm already laughing.
Unemployed population, a youth population. Yes, and at the same time, contribute to guaranteeing our national security. Building walls around Nigeria could be the next line of thought if we must fight this insurgency with every sense of responsibility and every sense of seriousness.
Okay. I wonder how that is going to work out anyway, but however, we'll see how that goes. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on this, Dr. Salifu. Do enjoy the rest of the day and happy Workers' Day again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.